Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Steve, I think you are the first ever cybersecurity product leader that I host. It's not a typical product, or at least it's like considered like a sexy product. It's like other marketplaces or more type of consumer applications. So I'm really curious about it, and I want to learn more about what is cybersecurity for you?
Yeah, cybersecurity is we're the defense helping you as individuals, as businesses to be secure. And yeah, it's a relatively new market. It's about, I would say, like 25 years old. The history of it basically comes back to, if you remember, the late 90s when Windows was having a bunch of bugs and Trojan horse issues. That's where this whole industry around antiviruses initially started, and then VPNs, network security. And now it's one of the fastest growing segments across all of technology.
And from a product perspective, what are the unique aspects for someone who wants to work in cybersecurity?
Yeah, the really unique thing about cybersecurity is it's one of the rare industries in which your buyer tends to be your user. So it's actually very important to be quite technical. And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to be an engineer by trade. I myself am not. I studied to be a journalist. But it's deeply understanding how customers think about securing their organization, what their priorities are, and being able to speak their language is really critical. So I've had a lot of success in fostering talent from customer-facing teams, customer success or sales or support, because they spend all their time talking to customers and understanding how they're deploying security products.
So you mentioned, I have here my notes, that you have over 150,000 business customers.
That's right.
Large, small. I also see that you have a B2C segment. So what is kind of the basics of the minimum level of defense for, let's say, an individual, and what's the maximum level that an enterprise client might need?
If I just ran into anyone on the street, the most basic things I'd recommend to them is, one, start with multi-factor authentication. Your bank or your social login will support it. And the reason that's important is that allows you to ascertain and verify that it's you trying to log into a service. Second is use a password manager whenever possible. Password reuse is the most common threat and reason for attack. Just this morning, AT&T announced that over a year of call and text records were breached, and about 80% of breaches have to do with human factors. And the third thing is keep your devices updated. I know that sounds really lame, but a trend that we've seen in security over the last 10 years is security being built in as opposed to bolt on. So for example, disk encryption is built into the latest version of Windows, the latest version of Mac OS or iOS. Your browsers are constantly being updated and to raise their defenses. So keep everything updated. I know whenever I hop on a Zoom and see on the top right, update your Chrome, it sort of drives me crazy. And I want to be like, stop the call now and reboot.
So you mentioned that you don't come from a particularly technical background. You started in PR as a journalist. Mm-hmm. So how can someone who doesn't come from technical or cybersecurity background end up as a chief product officer at 1Password?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've had the privilege of basically doing every single customer-facing role. I've done support, sales engineering, customer success. And I would say the biggest credibility that a product person can have is deeply understanding the customer. And being customer facing is a great way to start from that. And what I learned over the decade plus that I was supporting customers is understanding their language, understanding their agenda structures, understand what their priorities are, and also do the research on the side, learn about competitors. One of the earliest things I did when I first started doing product marketing was I did a competitive brief for all of Microsoft's products. And that's just something that sort of came naturally to me as somebody that grew up, building websites and building computers.
What would you say is kind of the minimum level of technical expertise that it is required for a PM in cybersecurity to be successful?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it depends on if you're going to be customer facing or internal facing. So I've taken a lot of pride in fostering talent where about half the folks come from non-traditional product backgrounds. Traditional thinking about as, MBA or engineering or design as a background. There are a lot of internal roles that cybersecurity companies need PMs for. That's a great starting point for folks that don't have technical depth. For folks that do have that customer experience or understand the technology side of it, what I'd really recommend is just talk to customers, talk to 10 customers a week And you'll be amazed at how far you'll get in terms of your technical depth in about 6 months.
One of the things that I notice as a user is the pain that it takes to be maintaining passwords. So you mentioned how important it is to use a password manager, a two-factor authentication. But I also started to see different websites and mobile applications that do not require password, right? Like passwordless, even the passkey. So can you tell us more about how you're thinking about the future of this type of features?
Yeah, passwordless is so exciting, and I've been working with the FIDO Alliance since about 2014, so over a decade now. And there have been different attacks or tries at passwordless, and passkeys are our best shot. So the way I describe passkeys is it uses a combination of something that is stored locally on your device and something that's known in the cloud to basically create like a two-way connection. The jokey way I describe it is it's like a security Horcrux. If you're familiar with Harry Potter, you have like little bits of secrets like living in different places, and they all add up to allow you to authenticate. And the reason passkeys in particular are super exciting is they're usable. And the predecessors to passkeys are like U2F, like YubiKeys, and UAF, which Google pushed and whatnot. And Apple, Google, and Microsoft pushing passkeys. Google with Gmail, you can require passkeys to log into Gmail. With Amazon, PayPal, all these services, that's really going to make the difference to shift over to passkeys, because technology that consumers are comfortable with are what gets adopted on the B2B side. This has been the major shift in just computing and security over the last decade. So it's a really exciting sort of transition. We have a service called passkeys.directory. That's basically just a database of every service that support passkeys. It started with, I think, 13 a year and a half ago. Now we're over 150. So it's been really exciting to see the adoption pace.
Speaking about your product, like one of the things that caught my eye is that you have a solution for individuals all the way up to large enterprises. That is not very common. Like I've seen a lot of B2B companies that focus on B2B, and I've seen a lot of consumer companies, but like companies that do both is quite unique. So curious about the rationale behind that.
Yeah. So our background, and I would even argue, Carlos, that we're the only cybersecurity company that supports both consumers and B2B at scale. So the history of our company is we had 4 co-founders that wanted to work remote back 18 years ago. And turns out nobody was working remote back then. So they had to start their own company. And the philosophy of the company was build great products, support the hell out of our customers. So the history of our company is like literally like we only had engineers and support people for a majority of our history. And what we found is we built such a great product solving a really painful problem around password management that people were bringing us to work. So people are bringing us as a cybersecurity product to work and saying, hey, I'm using this to share a password to some production system. Let me share the link with you so you can only have just one-time access to it. And that naturally grew the B2B business to the point in which we were selling to B2B before we even had formal salespeople or a sales department. So we've had this really natural, amazing sort of consumer-led growth that led into a B2B entry. Now, B2B has outpaced, it's about 2/3 of our business. So it's grown dramatically. And it does require an interesting sort of blend of product strategy, because you've got to balance the sort of product-led growth motion on the consumer side, while also the sales assist motion on the B2B side. Now, I'll say the thing that's kept our course is because we're a product that all 1,000 plus 1Password employees use every single day, we're super, super critical about our own product. And I think that really helps us and serves us well in terms of continue to raising the bar as opposed to, being comfortable with where we are.
And I think that's a perfect example of product-led growth. In fact, I'd argue you've been doing product-led growth before that term became a thing.
Yes. Product-led growth as a term sort of drives me crazy, because to me, it's a marketing term. Fundamentally, product-led growth is, does product understand the customer and how they adopt the product? And is there a feedback loop between the customer and the product to build better and better products? That's basic good product management in my mind. But yeah, way before the term existed or should have existed, I think that's what we've been leading with.
So Steve, help me understand, how big is your product team and what are the different functions that report into you?
Yeah, I have about 100 people within my organization. I have product management, product marketing, design, tech alliances, and product operations. So we're quite multifaceted.
So as you think about building your next generation of your products, and given that you have multiple segments, how do you balance those different needs?
Yeah, it's actually a really great time to ask about that because we've been single product for such a long time. Yes, we sell to different markets, but fundamentally the bones are the same. We actually just announced and launched our second product recently, which is extended access management. And it's forced us to sort of reevaluate how we do things. When you have a product that has like a solid foundation and you're in the iteration mode, that requires a different set of skills from a design and PM standpoint than when you're building a product from scratch that's doing 0 to 1. And you can't just put the same effective people on an iterative product, on an innovative product. You've got to actually balance the right attitude and mindset of folks. So, for example, when we have 150,000 B2B customers, it's really important for us to be cautious about what we actually ship to customers, right? Whereas when you're building a net new product, you want to optimize for less learning lessons and velocity, getting new iterations in front of customers, getting that feedback loop, and building quickly. So as a result, it's actually forced us to think about our talent strategy quite differently and seeding the right folks for the different teams as we set up our team for the future of the growth of the business.
So in this case, how do you set up the team, this 0 to 1 team, to ensure that they are resourced? At the same time, you have your core team that is serving that large base of customers.
So the way that we set that team up is we have a trifecta system, which is PM, design, EM. Those are like fundamentally the leaders of the function. So we have a PM that's ultimately responsible for product readiness and market readiness. And then we have the design and engineers that sit next to them. Ultimately, ties break down to the product manager because the product manager has the most expertise. And then we have pillars for each of the different areas of the new products that exist. So we have 4 components of the product that exist. So we have different trifectas for each of them. And then we also have sort of parallel groups, I would say platform teams that are setting up ways for them to interface with the existing product as well. And this is, there's an axiom that the only constant at startups is change. And with the net new team, you've got to realize you're probably going to reorg that function every 6 to 9 months because you're going to learn new lessons. You're going to hit scale. You're going to realize that one of those pillars is more effective or more successful than other pillars too. So a really key thing to find in that trifecta leadership are folks that are resilient to change and are open to changing decisions.
One thing that I personally faced when I was expanding my business from one product, we also had B2C first, and then we expanded into B2B, was how to maintain morale for the people that stayed in the core product. Because suddenly you have this new team that is the 0 to 1. That's the sexy team, right? The exciting one. That the CEO, the CPO, everybody's paying attention and calling them out all the time. So how do you go about also ensuring that leadership is on it so they actually can grow, but that the people who are not in the 0 to 1 team feel recognized because ultimately they are the one bringing most of the revenue home?
Exactly. So I had this exact experience at Duo. So when we split up the product teams, I was responsible for the revenue driving existing multi-factor authentication business. And then my friend Trevor was running the net new business. I'll tell you about strategies I took when I was like leading that function, and then strategies that we take now as like leaders. So when I was leading that function, the tack that I took was, hey, reminding folks that the impact that we're having to customers, the number of customers that we're impacting with every single thing that we're shipping is monumental in comparison to the net new product, right? We have a tremendous responsibility to 150,000 customers that are paying for us right now. And every single little thing that we ship actually has a tremendous impact to their experience. Now, as leaders, the approach I've taken now with extended access management and the password manager is extended access management actually is built on the foundation of password management. Our strategy is to actually resell and expand our existing customers and provide more value to them. And that only works if our EPM stays at the top of the class. We are seen as a premium product and we have to maintain our position and actually go further ahead as the premium product in that space. So we also set goals for that team in 2 ways. So we have 2 pillars related to the password management team. One is usability. And the goal is just functionally like, are people having a phenomenal experience? is our NPS high, our reviews high. And the second goal is around conversion rate and growth. The reason that we bifurcated is we wanted to give the PMs and designers and the engineers the space to be creative about ways to improve the end user's experience, because we're really bought into that. And that really motivates us, because when you hear customer problems and solve them, then you're able to execute it. And we wanted to shield those products or projects separately from like necessarily like revenue driving projects.
So for the people who are not familiar with a password management platform, like, can you tell us a little bit more about what this is?
Yeah, sure. So 1Password, I like to describe us as we're the door to the internet. You don't really think about the door. The destination is the house or the building or the office that you get into. So 1Password allows you to create unique passwords for every single service that you log into. Literally, we see every single corner of the internet, and have unique passwords for them and be able to share them within families. So a lovely use case is, imagine like your streaming services. You know, it used to be, it was like Netflix. Now it's like Netflix and like 40 other services that you sign up for, making sure those are easy to share with your family, but also making sure that they're secure. And the nice thing about 1Password is once you set it up, you don't think about it anymore, because it allows you to log in seamlessly with a password that's not going to be stolen.
And I think that's another unique aspect of the product. Like, people do not go in general to 1password.com, right? Or download in order to use your product. You're mostly embedded with other applications, so people can easily find their password directly where they are. So how do you think about building something that you can't fully control, because in a way you're part of a third-party application?
Yeah, totally. And frankly, we get some criticism that is not controlled by us, because we don't own a browser, we don't own an operating system, we don't own a mobile device. The first thing I do is we try to keep ourselves humble and just recognize that, hey, customers don't think about us day to day. They just use us to get to the things that they want to get into. And I just feel like every company, it's so easy to get sucked into this like narcissism track of thinking that everyone's thinking about you all the time. But as a product person, it pays to be humble and recognize you live in a broader ecosystem of stuff that people are actually worried about. The second thing is we spend a tremendous amount of time working on every single service area. My CTO, Pedro, and I always joke that we play on hard mode. We're the only password manager that has like robust Linux support, for example, for passkeys. We support every single desktop operating system. We support every single mobile operating system. We support every single like major browser type. And frankly, we could complain about it or say, hey, we don't want to support like stuff that's used by 1%, but it's our responsibility as a premium offering to give a consistent experience across every single service area. Because I'll tell you, in this room, out of frame, there are 7 different computers, 3 of which are Linux, 2 of which are Windows, and the rest of which are Apple ecosystem. 1Password is the first thing I install on every single computer that I set up, or every single mobile device I set up. Why? Because it's my gateway to get into all my services, my bank, my social services, my single sign-on. So it's our responsibility, frankly, to make sure that we're keeping that floor really, really high.
I mean, it's truly your responsibility. As I think about it, like, people are literally pouring their entire password information. So how do you go about kind of securing your own product?
Yeah. So we have a really unique model. I like to say that we're sort of a local first SaaS service. So every single device actually has a unique key that's stored on the encrypted part of that device that actually needs to be combined with your either master password or biometric. Those 2 things combine to allow you to unlock. So everything that's actually synced to our service is totally encrypted, but we don't have half of the encryption key. So we literally cannot see it. That makes me sleep a lot easier at night, because we've built our system to basically make the stuff that we're storing in the cloud as useless as possible.
And how do you think about the competitive landscape? Like, for example, when Apple released their own native feature, right? So people can now use their own password management system without having to download a third-party tool.
Yeah, we think it's awesome, because frankly, like Apple, Google, Microsoft have way bigger bullhorns, and they have way more of an impact on demand for password management than anyone else. So every time that's happened, it's actually led to a greater top of funnel impact for us. Like more and more people are aware of the problem. They recognize that we're the premium offering. They come and adopt us. There's within the identity community, there's a little bit of vibe of like, hey, password managers are great for like highly technical people, but the average person is not going to adopt a password management tool. I challenge that. And I think the investment that Apple and Microsoft and Google are continue to making is proving that there's value here, and we can make it easy for every single person to use a password management tool.
I mean, even in my own case, I have a password management tool I share with my mom. And I'm also thinking about if something happens to her, or even if something happens to me, like I want a safe place where other people could access that information and never become a bottleneck for anything important.
Yeah, I recognize it's a grim thought, but it's totally true. And you think about how much of our identity is digital nowadays, and how digital identity is a little bit of a farce because you don't actually have a digital identity. Your digital identity is like 1,000 different instances of Carlos's on 1,000 different databases. And what we're trying to do is aggregate those identities and make it easy for you to manage them as much as possible, and setting up for an eventual distributed identity future, which is going to take a long amount of time for us to approach.
Something that I always find funny is on airports. There's so many ads around like cybersecurity companies, all kinds of flavors. So it's clearly a mainstream opportunity. Otherwise, they wouldn't be advertising in such big areas.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's one of the 3 fastest growing categories within software. And the reality is, as the world gets more complicated, and especially, now that we live, both you and I are not working from an office, as we live in a hybrid or mobile world with all these different service areas, with all these applications coming from the outside, it's getting harder and harder to play defense. And, productivity and security is always like historically thought of as frictionful between both of them. What we're trying to do is actually make the secure thing the productive thing. And the fact that we've actually grown from a consumer business in which like people find value from us as individuals has that really set us up really well for this remote first world.
Let's talk about that remote first world. Like there are way more people now connected online, and look, all of our information is on the cloud. So on paper, there's technically less things that an individual who's not in cybersecurity can control. It's not part of our core business, right? So how do you go about enabling more of that productivity in an environment where there is technically less control?
Yeah, totally. And that's really the thought process around extended access management. The reality is more applications are coming from the outside into the business. Our CEO, Jeff Shiner, always talks about how software used to be bought on golf courses. Now it's coming with your employees, right? People join a company, they like a tool. This is always a story of Slack or Monday, Dropbox, Trello, all these Atlassian, all these great SaaS products over the last decade. The way they worked was coming in as unsanctioned shadow IT, then there's enough of a wellspring of use, and then the business has to adopt it. That's only sped up post-pandemic. So Gartner estimates there are twice as many apps being used for work now than in 2019, and that about 30 to 40% of apps are just unknown to the business. What extended access management is trying to do is, hey, IT can no longer be inside out. There's no, man in a shadowy room making all the decisions anymore. IT is actually a collaborative sort of outside in approach. How can we build security to empower that outside in, to make the unsanctioned sanctioned, to make the untrusted trusted? So that's the approach that we're taking from both an application standpoint of, hey, we'll help your organization have visibility to all the SaaS applications that are coming from the outside in, and then decide what to do with them. Decide, hey, actually, I want to support this and manage this. Let's pull this into our single sign-on. Or to say, hey, actually, this is something I'm comfortable with people using. And then same with devices too. We ran a survey, 20% of employees admitted that they only use their personal device for work. No, that doesn't mean like occasionally, like literally only use a personal device for work. Obviously, that puts the business at risk. But the reason employees are doing that is because they prefer the devices they use. I remember I was talking to a big bank recently, and they said, in the last 2 years, they finally decided to let people use Macs for the first time. This is one of the 4 biggest banks in the United States. Within a year, I think it was like 35% of employees chose to use Macs. People prefer to use what they're comfortable with, right? But how do we make those devices trustworthy? Because the reality is there's two types of businesses. Businesses that recognize they have an unmanaged device problem, and businesses that are lying to themselves that they don't have a managed device problem.
The thing with, for me, with cybersecurity is that I only recognize those things after the fact. Like when a problem has happened, and like, oh,
Exactly.
and then it's when I need to go and fix it so it doesn't happen again, right? So when you go and have these conversations with, let's say, a CIO at a top bank, where they are obviously trying to figure out like a big solution to cover so many angles, and you approach this, and they probably have something. I don't know what it is, but they might have something. Like, how do you structure these conversations so they recognize the value that you're bringing to the table and they actually take the decision to bring you in, knowing how hard it is to then eventually replace a solution?
Yeah. So it's remarkably similar to healthcare. So my wife's a physician, which is why it brings me to this thought. Cybersecurity is preventative primary care. It's doing the right things to reduce the risk of bad things happening down the road. But too often, businesses take the ignored until something bad happens approach. Ignored until, I broke my leg or have gout or pulled something. So when we talk to these decision makers, everyone thinks about it in terms of risk profile. There's a certain amount of acceptable risk that every business is going to take in order to be productive. But there are also certain risks that the business is not willing to take. So that's the conversation that we have with customers of, what are your priorities in terms of your risk profile, and how can we help you reduce that? Because increasingly, the way that businesses are thinking about cybersecurity, 10 years ago, cybersecurity wasn't even a board level conversation. Now, a CISO is a super common, chief information security officer is a super common role. Security is literally like a national, like presidential level conversation at this point. So businesses have to actively and be proactive about the risks that they're taking, because think about the reputational damage that the Equifax breach led to that organization, or like I mentioned earlier today, the AT&T breach that was disclosed. Their competitors, Verizon, T-Mobile, and whatnot, are going to see that as a bonanza to say, hey, your provider let you down, leaked all your text and call records, come over to us because we've got a stronger security story. It's actually a competitive differentiator now.
And I can imagine that you guys have been using machine learning for a long time, preventively and reactively. But now with new Gen AI technology, like how has that impacted the way you think about building your products?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So because the way that we work is filling every single type of login flow or payment flow, we have been using machine learning for probably over a decade now in order to make sure that our filling model works effectively. But LLMs have been very, very exciting for two reasons. The second one's a little fearful, I would say. The first one is the ability to take authentic actions on behalf of a person just gives us on the defense side so many more options to like auto configure or auto secure or take steps on behalf of the user. So that's really exciting. And we're really excited about opportunities to do things like credential resets on behalf of people in a high trust way. Now, the flip side of that is if that's available for the defense side, it's also available for the attack side. And I don't know if you've noticed an increased spate in like SMS spam or phishing emails around.
Oh my God, tell me about it.
Exactly. That's frankly the reason that LLMs are really good at creating high context, believable messages. So that also means the attack side has an advantage now too, which brings me to that second point, which is authenticity and proving there's a person with intent behind an action is going to be increasingly important in this new era, right? And I think we have a really unique position because 1Password is always tied to a person. Steve or Carlos choose to use 1Password and use it to federate access to all the services that I use. So we're really excited about the implications and the opportunities for user verification and user authenticity as stepping stones to ultimately a true distributed identity workflow when it comes to digital world.
What are other ways of identification? Like, meaning I've seen on the iPhone, you have Face ID. The other day I was buying my groceries on supermarket in Whole Foods, and I was able to scan my palm through Amazon Go and check out automatically. Like, what are you seeing kind of beyond the traditional typing a password?
Yeah, it's definitely like Apple has normalized biometrics. I always sort of joke that like I feel like James Bond and Ethan Hunt made us more distrustful of biometrics than we need to be, because it feels like it's as simple as like lifting a fingerprint with tape. It's actually not. That's actually not how these things work anymore. They're extremely strong, and the difference between historical biometrics and modern biometrics is historical biometrics was all software based. So if you remember those crappy little like ThinkPad little slow finger roll things, that was actually like stored as ones and zeros on the device and could be like ripped out of it. The way that modern biometrics work is there's actually a trusted platform module or an encrypted sort of blob locally that can't be transported out. So that's why every time you set up a new iPhone, you have to do Face ID setup again, because there's not transport of that information over. So the really exciting thing about biometrics is because Apple and Google and Windows Hello have normalized it, people are more and more comfortable for using it. So you see Clear in the airport, you see Amazon Go used in AWS. So that's really exciting. Now the challenge is all those systems don't talk to each other. Apple, Google, Amazon, they're just all sort of verticalized in and of themselves. And for us to have a consistent sort of digital and physical identity tied together, there needs to be a means to allow those to interoperate in a way that's trustworthy without leaking those information, because otherwise we wind up in the same scenario with passwords where people are using passwords. There's nothing you can do about changing your face or your fingerprint.
Exactly. And I was even thinking about voice recognition now with Gen AI. You can truly clone someone else's voice.
Exactly. Yeah, those deepfakes are very convincing.
Steve, it's been a pleasure to learn more about cybersecurity with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Carlos.